Okay. I'm Orkhan Valiyev. I came with a debatable paper that I will try to debate nationalism in the South Caucasus in the context of integrated nationalism. That it's somehow the new in terms of South Caucasus. Maybe we can say that former the colonial countries and nations. So. As you know, nationalism, or let's say just flag waving, is just symbolizes nationalism is everywhere and became the global trend. So in this case, I have the special research question that how can integrated nationalism serve as a viable alternative in terms of aggressive and destructive nationalism in the South Caucasus, in terms of course, in the case of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the Georgia. Hypothesis is that integrated nationalism can mitigate the radical nationalism that could be a threat for young nations of the South Caucasus. So in this case, support regional stability by promoting inclusivity, facilitating international integration that the three nations need this integration, international integration. So addressing historical and ethnic grievances constructively, enhancing cooperation among the South Caucasus states, which is much more important, specifically after the recent tensions. So conceptual framework, the types of nationalism. Of course, I'm not going to talk about the classic types of nationalism theoretically from Gengender and so on. I'm gonna dealing with in terms of the new nationalism. So in this case, aggressive or destructive nationalism is just refer to the big nations of the modernity. For example, let's say the American nationalism. We can witness the aggressive and destructive nationalism in the US in terms of the Trump's policy and other, let's say, the founding nations of modern time. So multicultural nationalism is a new, the different alternatives that has been proposed by scholars, including, for example, Tariq Mudit from Bristol University, UK. So integrated nationalism that I will try to propose in terms of the South Caucasus. So in this case, the key concepts are the state survival, regional security, and international legitimacy. Actually, state survival is referred to all the states, including the US, Turkey, Russia, and so on. So, but regional security and international legitimacy is much more referred to the small, or let's say young nations of the post-Soviet or post-Cold War era, specifically in terms of in the AI age. So aggressive and destructive nationalism, as I mentioned before, in terms of they say Trump's era specifically started over there, and even we can witness its traces in Russian policy and so on. That has been trying to deconstruct of the modern establishment in terms of law, politics, and so on. So we can say that yes, we are being witnessed the post Westphalian or Westphalian era. So the law or juridical system doesn't work. So that's why nationalism came back to the stage again, and all the states and the nations tried to integrate their national policy in terms of the nationalism. So in terms of the South Caucasus, a different landscape. As you know, South Caucasus is geographically a small place landscape, but has different, how to say, the issues that could have the regional or global effects. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia are the main nations of this region, the former colonist nations, or maybe we can say periphery. I wrote my PhD thesis through Miroslav Roche's theory, small nation theory, we can say model, while defining the nation-building process in Azerbaijan in 19th century. So that's why these nations are former colonies or peripheries of the colonies anyway. But still needing consolidating national identity in this uncertain time, and subject to internal and external pressures, because the new nationalism requires all the states to reimagine their reshape their, how to say, the policy to survive their states. These threats is referred to all the nations, all the states. But specifically the young nations of the, let's say, the post-Soviet or post Cold War era are feeling these threats much more strictly, directly. That's why they need different types of nationalism. For example, in terms of the South Caucasus, the three nations of the region cannot, or let's say shouldn't, use just the destructive or the aggressive nationalism, or shouldn't try to integrate those nationalism, because in order to survive in this uncertain time, because, for example, the United Nations, which has been established in order to, how to say, contribute to the establishment of the peaceful and security in the regions, let's say. But however, its institutions failed to solve how to say these problems, let's say, in terms of Ukraine and Palestine and any different issues. So that's why the states need their how to say, own national strategy that would facilitate to be survived in this uncertain time. So in this case, integrated nationalism that aimed not to compete with destructive and aggressive nationalism aggressive nationalism. So rather, integrated nationalism aimed to develop strategy in terms of this three nations of the South Caucasus, to develop strategy that would facilitate integration to the international community, that will, how to say, would open a new door to be survived, to keep the national sovereignty, because we are being faced uncertain times, and this uncertain time is much more referred to this young nations of the post-Soviet time. So in terms of the Azerbaijani case, as you know, the Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, the first independence appeared in the early of 19th century. Three of the nations declared their independence in Tbilisi in 1918 on May. So, and then they restored their independence right after the dissolution of the USSR. So, and the three of nations try to develop the new different types of the policies anyway. But now, specifically after the Second Karabakh War, that Azerbaijan liberated its invaded territories and started to negotiations with Armenia, the peace peace issues, and reached the important milestone in terms of peace negotiations. So, and also Azerbaijan and Georgia has a strategic relations right after the restoration of independence. I mean, in the early of 1990s. But however, the three nations of the South Caucasus need urgently the different types of the national strategy, because it seems that, yes, nationalism is they came to this stage, and in order to be survived, all the states, including these three nations of South Caucasus, need nationalism as an inevitable solution. So the question is that what kind of nationalism? Because we cannot, let's say, in terms of Azerbaijan cannot integrate to the destructive nationalism of the US, for example, because its capacity and aims and the historical context is totally different. And Azerbaijan's geography and the problems much more different. So in this case, the member of the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan need different types of nationalism. So in this occasion, Azerbaijan started to adopt the new, how to say, the national strategy. For example, multicultural nationalism just was one of them that started right after the 1910s by the decree of the president. What was its aim? It was aimed to adopt, to have, to develop inclusive the national strategy that would embrace all the ethnic and the religious minorities under the Azerbaijani national identity. And over the 15 years, the proof that yes, it worked. But on the other side, as it's mentioned, inclusive of ethnic and religious minorities, but on the other side, the right after the Second Karabakh War, and also the uncertainty of the global politics, the regionalization, regional cooperation became the new inevitable for the states because in terms of, let's say, the migration and regional global the conflicts in terms of Ukraine, Palestine, and Iran, and so on. And also artificial intelligence that started to threat the national sovereignty of the states. So, due to the limited capacity of the nation states, regional nationalization or regional cooperation became a new inevitable for the nation states. So in this case, the Azerbaijan, including Turkey, started to, as a leading country, establish organization of Turkic states, a new part of the Azerbaijani, how to say, the national policy in the 21st century. And also, in terms of the Azerbaijani case, the integrated nationalism, as you know, the national language is the main issue for the nation states, as the leading scholars of the nationalism studies, Ernest Kellner, mentioned that right after the Industrial Revolution, the nations became the main issue for the nation states. They needed to standardize an official language. So, but however, from my perspective, I believe that yes, in terms of the South Caucasus, let's say in terms of Azerbaijan, yes, because of the historical background that started second part of the 19th century. So even in terms of national language strategy, Azerbaijan need different the strategy, national strategy, Azerbaijani national language, specifically right after the Second Karabakh War and historical victory became then superized in Azerbaijani society. But however, promoting Turkish, Russian, and English in Azerbaijani society, from my perspective, would be part of the integrated nationalism that would facilitate to integrate international community that to be survive Azerbaijani state in this uncertain time. So in terms of Armenian case, I argue that yes, three of these nations need integrated nationalism in order to survive, because survive won't possible with only one case, or Azerbaijan or Georgia, should be based on the three nations of these how to say nations, because region is just belong to the three nations of this region. So the main issue, the main obstacle in terms of the Armenian case, in terms of the integrated nationalism, the constitutional reform, because as you know, constitution is the main part of the national social contract of the nations. So throughout the modern time. So but however, the Armenians, the constitution has direct how to say the claim over Azerbaijani territory, which is recognized by the international law. And also liberated after the Second Karabakh War in 2020. But however, the Armenian needs to the reform in terms of the, how to say, constitution. A constitution to reduce territorial irredentism, because okay, nationalism is inevitable solution to be survived in this uncertain time of global politics. But however, it doesn't, and it shouldn't mean that, yes, the young nations of the region should prioritize irredentic nationalism, for example, to have some direct or indirect claim over each other's. I think it shouldn't be tolerated, and it should be the new threat to regional, how to say, integration, regional security, and peace in the region. So the main issue is that the potential, how to say, for integrated nationalism they need to diffuse regional tension, for example. So and also, of course, the peace negotiation with Armenia and Azerbaijan. So in this case, the role of sorry. The Georgia's the case, as you know, the Georgia started with have the conflict with Russia in the early of 1910s, like we can say. Actually, the conflict became then, how to say, the main issue in the South Caucasus right after the restoration of the independence for Azerbaijan and Georgia in the region, the rest of the region as well. So that some scholars compared Georgia to Ukraine in the regional discourse, something like that. So integrated nationalism in terms of the Georgians, they could reinforce territorial integrity, they promote minority inclusion, and also contribute to regional stability. So in this case, we can talk about the role of the integrated nationalism. So which is the kind of nationalism that emphasizes regional cooperation, internal inclusivity, and inclusivity that would, how to say, embrace all religious and the ethnic minorities. We can witness in Azerbaijani society, we witnessed this issue in terms of the Second Karabakh War. As I mentioned before, Azerbaijan started the multicultural policy in terms of national strategy, and it worked in the Second Karabakh War because you can find the traces of the support all the ethnic and religious groups, including majority and minority, to the states, how to say, the policy over the liberation of the invaded territory in part of Karabakh. So that's why it worked, is much more important. And also international engagement. International engagement is much more important for the young nation of the region to be survived because the threat is being felt much more rather in terms of in comparison with other big nations, because let's say U.S. Trump's disruptive and aggressive nationalism's aim is different to compete with China. But the young nations of the South Caucasus national strategy should be different in order to be survived, to keep their independence and national sovereignty alive. So the second part is just avoiding extremes of both radical nationalism and identity rise is much more important as well. The support sovereignty through integration and not isolation, because I believe that, I argue that in terms of the integrated nationalism, the three nations of the region need to, how to say, recognize their national sovereignty, because to be survive starts this point. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia need to recognize each other as a sovereign, how to say, entity. Azerbaijan and Georgia, it doesn't matter whether the threats, the uncertain issues, developed the rational and pragmatic strategy between Azerbaijan, between Tbilisi and Baku. This, how to say, the process needed involvement of Armenia to this process to recognize each other's territorial integrity as a sovereign, how to say, entity. Otherwise, it would be the problem. So, I will try to complete in order to, how to say, to take time for Q&A questions part. So the policy implications in terms of this integrated nationalism for governments, for international actors, and for academia. To promote inclusive the language, minority, and foreign policy strategies. is much more important. So international actors, the support integrated nationalism through diplomatic and economic engagement. So in this case, it's much more important how to say the language that which is being used by the governments through in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan as well at the same time. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, nationalism is already became an inevitable solution for the state. In that case, for example, the nations are being how to say assimilated in order to survive their states. So that's why, for example, we cannot, and maybe we shouldn't talk about how to say the liberal democracy or something like that, because even we cannot find its traces, let's say, even Anglo-Saxon countries, because the situation of the global politics is different and the requirement has changed. So we are on the way, let's say, establishment process. So on this establishment process, the three nations of the region, South Caucasus, need integrated nationalism in order to survive, keep their how to say independence and national the sovereignty. So for academia, expand research on nationalism, but however, the academic research, from my perspective, from my paper, shouldn't how to say promote irredentless nationalism. For example, Azerbaijan started had a war with Second Karabakh War, right? Liberated its invaded territories. But however, Azerbaijan just focused on liberation, not intervention. So Azerbaijani national strategy in terms of Second Karabakh War was not based on irredentless nationalism. Was based on just how to say liberation, liberated that how to say the territory which is recognized by international law as part of Azerbaijani Republic. That's so Azerbaijan. That's why launched a war against liberation, not irredentism or intervention to any this, nation's territory. So that's why I think this is much more important, that it should be how to say supported. It need to be supported by the academic research. For example, if the academicians start to how to say they promote irredentless nationalism in terms of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia, it would how to say destroy the possible how to say peace and security in the region. So national sovereignty, because the time is uncertain, the global uncertain. So we need integration to the global community. So in this case, at the first glance, we have to recognize each other's territorial integrity and also develop inclusive national strategy in terms of our how to say internal the minorities in terms of ethnic and religious. So. The conclusion, I will try to the complete, not to take much time. So nationalism is just inevitable, of course, but at the beginning of let's say in 20th century, it should be needed to how to differentiate it. For example, the young nations of the South Caucasus shouldn't how to say they compete with Turkey, with Russia, with the US, or with China, because our how to say priorities are different. So in this case, we need to develop different types of nationalism, which should be based on our historical background and priorities. So the South Caucasus, that's why needed, from my perspective, of course, from my research, integrated nationalism. So this strategy can secure independence and force peace without aggressive nationalism, or let's say. So now, if you don't mind, I want to stop here. Maybe we will continue with questions. Thank you for your attention.